In a somewhat recent live stream, MatPat said something really interesting.
Which came first, the chicken or the egg, right? The book stories or the game story, and that's the thing that you got to solve. I think that's the thing you got to solve there, and that's the clue that solves FNAF security breach.
And given that this was right after the guy met Scott and got told he didn't solve security breach, it really felt like something that was worth taking into account. And looking through the books again, it blew my mind just how right he was. Now, what I once took as a look at the progression of the Pizzaplex itself comes across more as a progression of security breach's real-world development. A while back, it was discovered that the file for the first Tales book, Lally's game, was first created all the way back in November 2019. This is just a few months after the first security breach teaser dropped, where we saw an early design of the Pizzaplex. And wouldn't you know it, it looks just like the Pizzaplex did in this first book's stories. Also, the third story, Under Construction, lifts a quote directly from the September 2020 announcement by Steelwolf Studios. So that's probably around the time the story was finished. We also know the last story that was written. After the 8th book was announced, we got a change in the 7th book's description, swapping one story out for a different one. This new story, Bleeding Heart, must then be the final story written, since it was used to substitute a scrapped story when the one book after it already existed. Bleeding Heart matches the Pizzaplex we see in Security Breach perfectly. So if the stories are based around the development of the game, rather than an in-universe progression of the Pizzaplex, what can this tell us? In order to find out, we need to create a rough timeline of when these stories were written. Luckily, I have one written out from back when I thought this was telling us the order of events. While some little things change here and there are basically 3 different versions of the Pizzaplex shown in the books. There's one where the Pizzaplex is a big circle split up like a pizza, with each slice being a different attraction. There's one that matches perfectly with the Pizzaplex in Security Breach. And then there's one that has bits and pieces of both. We can pretty easily see what order to put these in. First the circle one from 2020, then the mixed one, and then the game-accurate one. In the first era, we have the following stories: Lally's game and Under Construction from Book 1, Haps from Book 2, and Pressure and Claustrophobia from Book 3. These stories consistently feature attractions like the climbing tubes, AR booths, carousel, and roleplay area, none of which appear in Security Breach. In the second era, we have GGY. This one features most of the stuff from the first era, but it also has the Fazcade from Security Breach. Nexi. This one is in the same camp as GGY. It's mostly the old layout, but it has the tunnels from the Security Breach version and also Bonnie Bowl. Tiger Rock. I'm technically cheating here because this one only has stuff from the first era, but it's a sister story to Nexi and lines up perfectly with it, so I'm putting it here anyway. The Storyteller. This one is the opposite of GGY. It mostly has stuff from the Security Breach version, like Monty Golf and Bonnie Bowl, but it also has the castle from the first version. And it has a yellow Glamrock Chica, and if you look closely around the Pizzaplex, you can see assets that imply this might once have been the plan for her design. Weirdly, it seems like this one was written later than Nexi and Tiger Rock, despite those 2 stories being sequels to it. And lastly, Drowning, I think. Not much of the Pizzaplex is explored here, and what little does get shown lines up with the first era, but those stories dropped off at Book 3, so it would be weird for there to be one straggler all the way in Book 6. Finally, in the third era, we have Somnophobia, Bobby Dots 1 and 2, The Monty Within, and Bleeding Heart. All 5 of these take great lengths to depict the Pizzaplex exactly as we see it in Security Breach. And the rest of the stories don't take place at the Pizzaplex, so we can just toss them out. From here, we can start putting dates to these eras, and that really shines a light on how to solve Security Breach. We can do this by accounting for some small details. The Storyteller was at least planned out by October 2020, since it's referenced in Princess Quest. It's not a particularly good reference, since it has the wrong kind of tree, but the castle next to it makes it pretty clear that it's supposed to be a reference regardless. This same logic applies to drowning, which inversely has references to Princess Quest. Bobby Dots Part 1 was initially written before Security Breach released, but got edited afterward to fix parts that described old elements of the game. Bleeding Heart was finished in February 2023, as that's when it replaced the Drew and Liam story. Any stories from the first era have to be from before September 2020, because that month gave us a Security Breach teaser trailer where Phaser Blast exists, which never showed up until the second era. The epilogues weren't written yet in May 2022, when a review copy of Lally's game was created. So using all that info, we can get a very general idea that the first era is from 2019 to 2020, the second era is from 2020 to 2021, and the third era is from 2021 to 2023. There's some wiggle room there, but for our purposes that should be close enough. The first, and by far the most important thing I got from all this, is that because the storyteller was planned by late 2020, the Mimic existed before Burn Trap was ever revealed. That means there's no possible way he could be a retcon. The second thing I got is that in 2019 and 2020, they still weren't really sure what was even gonna happen in the Pizzaplex. Not a single story in this era has anything to do with Security Breach. It's just random bad stuff happening at the location. Most of the lore-relevant stuff happens in the second era, so it seems like those were written when they were really developing the story. This leads into the third thing I got, which is that the GGY twist was planned very early on, even before the storyteller. It's clearly on the border between the first and second era. Based on this, it seems like the creation of GGY is what drove the development of Security Breach's story, meaning that despite this twist never being revealed in the game, it was built around it. I'm sure there's way more stuff to find using this knowledge, so this time more than ever, I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Is there anything I missed? I really want to keep following this train of thought, because even without MatPat basically telling us to, I've always had a weird interest in production orders and what they mean in the context of the media itself. It's a weirdly specific thing that just happened to be really useful here. I wish I could do something like this with Frights too, but there's no progression between the stories themselves, so the best I could do is sort them between ones that had art for their first page before the idea for that was scrapped and the ones that don't.